Hello everyone, welcome to Story Time. Today we will be reading Prince Joel's Birthday Wishes by Janie Martin. Now Janie is a local author who lives in Lowestoft, and she's very kindly said that we can read her stories for story time, so that's very exciting. Now this book is quite short and it's in two parts, so I'll read some for you today and then we will finish it off tomorrow. So get yourselves comfortable, sit down, snuggle up, and let's get ready for Prince Joel's Birthday Wishes. Part 1. Wishing. It was Prince Joel's birthday and he was 6. Last night trumpets had sounded through the land and bells had rung across the sea to make sure that no one forgot to get him a present. He was bright and funny, polite and thoughtful, so all the people loved him, and they didn't mind too much that they had no choice about buying him a gift. Prince Joel's mum was queen of the land and his dad was king of the sea, and one day Joel would be king of both. This meant that Joel and his sister, Princess Gemma, lived with their mum in her palace for part of the year and with their dad in his castle for the rest of the time. He woke up early and looked out of the window of his palace bedroom. The day was bright and sunny, and already the queue of people, each clutching a large, brightly wrapped present, stretched down the hill and into the distance. It was the custom that the royal princes and princesses could eat whatever they liked on their birthday. Prince Joel chose custard creams for his breakfast. He chomped them up quickly, fidgeting on his chair under the watchful gaze of the Queen, and then ran to the great hall to start receiving his presents. Later that day, Prince Joel sat playing happily, almost buried under a mound of wrapping paper. He had been given cars of every size and colour, robots, rockets, miles of train track with hundreds of trains, and much more besides. A flash of light caught his attention, and he looked up to find a strange woman with grey hair, sensible shoes, and fearsome glasses watching him. She looked like the scariest of all scary teachers, except for the big pink wings billowing from her back. "Hello," she said. "Hello," said Prince Joel, looking at the woman with curiosity. "Who are you, and why are you wearing those funny wing things?" he asked. "I am your fairy godmother, and I'm not wearing the wings. They're part of me," replied the fairy godmother, flying up to the ceiling. "Wow, that's so cool," said Prince Joel. "It is, isn't it?" his fairy godmother laughed as she gracefully returned to the floor. "Right, to business. Now you are 6, you are old enough to be granted with one wish each year on your birthday. So, what will it be?" Prince Joel thought very hard, while his fairy godmother played with a blue racing car. "I'd like to have another 1051 birthdays, just like today, all in a row," he announced. "What's the magic word?" asked the fairy godmother, peering sternly at Joel over her glasses. "Please," said Prince Joel, looking so adorably cute that the fairy godmother couldn't help smiling. "Of course, you may have 1051 birthdays in a row, but I won't be able to grant you a wish every day. You must wait until the 18th of May next year for the next one of those." The fairy godmother waved her magic wand, and there was another flash of light, and she was gone. That evening, as Prince Joel ate his tea of pizza and birthday cake, not together of course, that would be yucky, trumpets sounded throughout the land, and bells rang out across the sea. Princess Gemma and the Queen looked puzzled, so Prince Joel told them what had happened. The people also looked puzzled. They scratched their heads, they pinched each other to check they weren't dreaming. Then they shrugged and set about trying to find another present for Prince Joel. After all, he was very lovely and probably did deserve 2 birthdays. In the morning, after another breakfast of custard creams, Prince Joel went again to the Great Hall and spent several hours opening presents from the people. He had colouring books, felt tip pens, plastic animals, and much more besides. He spent what was left of the day colouring the plastic animals with his new pens before sitting down to more pizza and birthday cake. As Prince Joel snuggled up in bed, he heard the trumpets and knew that the bells were being rung in his dad's kingdom. He smiled contentedly and drifted off to sleep. The people of the land, however, were far from content. Much as they loved Prince Joel, this was getting ridiculous. 2 birthdays were just about acceptable, but 3? They sighed and went out to buy yet another present to take to the royal palace the following day. Prince Joel was up early, ate his breakfast of custard creams, and went to the Great Hall to receive more presents. By lunchtime, the queue of people had gone, and the discarded wrapping paper hardly even covered the floor. Prince Joel looked disappointedly at the stickers, football cards, pencil toppers, and other things he couldn't really play with. He ate chocolate spread sandwiches for lunch for the 3rd day running, while the Queen of the land told him to be grateful for all the presents he had received already. 3 birthdays in a row is quite enough for any young prince, she said. But I've got 1,051 birthdays, protested Prince Joel. My fairy godmother gave them to me. That doesn't mean you have to celebrate all of them. So tomorrow I think we should return to normal. The people need to go back to work and you need to eat something healthy, replied his mother firmly. Prince Joel looked at the floor and said nothing. Don't forget you'll have another birthday when we visit Dad, Princess Gemma said. Oh yes, said Prince Joel, cheering up a bit. The Queen of the land gave orders that there were to be no trumpets that evening and that Prince Joel was to have toast and jam for breakfast. As he was getting ready for bed, Prince Joel heard a noise that sounded a lot like trumpets. He knew it couldn't be, though. The trumpets wouldn't dare disobey the Queen of the land. He put his pyjamas on, got into bed, and didn't think any more about it. The Queen of the land had heard the trumpets too, and she was not happy. She sent for the chief trumpeter, who came scurrying in full of apologies. I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. I don't know what happened. It was as if we had no control over our hands. It didn't matter how hard we tried to resist. We reached out for our trumpets and... Having run out of words, the chief trumpeter shrugged and looked pleadingly at the Queen. She considered him for a long moment, lost in thought before finally saying, You may go. The people were not happy. They gathered in groups on street corners and complained. I can't afford to take more time off work to go up to the palace again, grumbled one. I need to work all the hours I can to get money for food. I've spent all I had on presents for the prince, moaned another. It's my son's birthday tomorrow and there are no toys left for me to buy him a present, wailed a third. Let's not go, suggested someone. They all agreed they would ignore the trumpets and not take a present to the palace. The next day, Prince Joel got up and made his way to breakfast, dragging his feet and feeling fed up. He liked toast and jam, but not as much as biscuits. When he got to the table, he saw a pile of custard creams. He was surprised, but very pleased. Cook tried to make you toast and jam, his mum said, but her hands wouldn't do it. They just kept reaching for the biscuit tin. It seems your fairy godmother's magic is stronger than I expected. You will have 1,051 birthdays, whatever I do. Prince Joel was aware that the Queen of the land was not happy, but he munched his way through his biscuits and skipped off to receive that day's presents. Although the queue was as long as it had been on the previous 3 days, the people looked grumpy and discontented. In fact, they seemed to be fighting against their feet as they walked up in turn and reluctantly handed Prince Joel a badly wrapped package. That day, Prince Joel received the strangest assortment of presents ever seen. He had a bottle top, an old button, a broken shoelace, a pen lid, a rusty paperclip, and many more similarly useless items. He was about to cry with disappointment when Princess Gemma suggested they get some paper and glue and make a collage, which was lots of fun. The Queen of the land had watched her subjects struggling against the magic that was forcing them up to the palace against their will. Now she looked at the sad collection of presents and knew that it was time for the King of the Sea to share the burden of their son's birthday wish. Later that day, Prince Joel and Princess Gemma were taken to the palace roof and strapped onto the royal flying carpet with their suitcases. The Queen of the Land kissed them goodbye, stepped back and said, "To the King of the Sea!" She clapped her hands 3 times and the magic carpet slowly lifted straight up, hovered for a moment, and then with a great whoosh, it was gone. Flying by carpet was fun, and it seemed like only a few minutes had passed before they landed in the courtyard of their dad's castle. The King of the Sea was waiting there to give them both a big hug. "Happy birthday, Joel," he boomed. The next morning, after a breakfast of custard creams, Prince Joel went down to the beach to receive his presents from the people. They had been waiting for the prince to arrive so that they could give their gifts, as was custom. But they were a bit surprised that the birthday bells had rung for 5 nights in a row. There were some worrying rumours that Prince Joel was having a birthday every day. Surely that couldn't be true, could it? His dad's people were very generous, and Prince Joel received toy boats, fishing rods and nets, bicycles, scooters, and much, much more. He was very happy and played outside until it was time for pizza and birthday cake. That evening, after Prince Joel was asleep, the bells rang and the people regretted being so generous with their first presents as they hunted around for a second gift for their prince. The next few days passed in much the same way as the days directly after Prince Joel's real birthday. He ate custard creams, chocolate spread sandwiches, pizza and birthday cake, and as the people became more and more unhappy and short of money, the prince's presents became less and less exciting. By the 4th day, he was opening untidily wrapped parcels of seashells, stones and sand. And although Prince Joel and Princess Gemma made another superb collage, the King of the Sea knew that his people could not be expected to provide any more presents for his young son. It was time for Prince Joel and Princess Gemma to return to the Queen of the Land. The rest of the year continued in a similar way. The prince and princess would spend 4 days with the Queen of the Land and then 4 days with the King of the Sea. Every day, Prince Joel would open presents, most of which were not worth having, from people who looked at him with anger or resentment in their eyes. It wasn't fun. In fact, it was really boring. Prince Joel was totally fed up with eating the same thing every day, and he began to dread opening presents. Worst of all, though, was that the people didn't love him anymore. As his next real birthday drew closer, Prince Joel was relieved. He was beginning to worry that he was turning into a custard cream. He had started to find biscuit crumbs in his socks at night and in his bed in the morning. He would speak to his fairy godmother and say he didn't want the rest of his 1051 birthdays and everything would be all right again. So that's the end of part 1 of Prince Joel's birthday wishes. Listen in tomorrow to find out what happens. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.